Have you ever wondered why you feel less and less desire to be close to your partner? Even when your health seems fine, something inside holds you back. Often, the reason isn't physical, it's emotional. Today, we're going to talk about 5 feelings that can block intimacy after 60 and what you can do about them. Each one is like a curtain we'll gently lift together. No shame, no pressure, just respect for yourself and what you're feeling. Let's start with something that comes up more often than you'd think. The quiet shame many people feel about how their body has changed. I've spoken with dozens of folks in their 60s, 70s, and beyond who've told me they just don't feel like themselves anymore when they look in the mirror. You gain a few pounds, your joints stiffen up, surgeries leave scars, or your skin doesn't feel like your own. And without even realizing it, that quiet discomfort starts spilling into other parts of your life, especially intimacy. It's not vanity. It's a deep emotional shift. You might start pulling away, thinking, nobody wants to see this anymore. But the truth is, shame about your body doesn't come from age. It comes from how we let ourselves believe we're no longer worthy of love or affection. And that just isn't true. I remember a man I worked with a few years ago. His name was Tom. He was 67, retired from his job as a math teacher in Ohio. He'd had 2 surgeries on his stomach and gained some weight during recovery. His wife Janet was still affectionate, but he started to turn away. At first, it was subtle, fewer hugs, shorter goodnights, but over time, he avoided being seen at all without a shirt. He told me one day, "Doc, I just don't see what she could possibly want from me now." What stuck with me most was what happened next. One night, Janet broke down in tears. She didn't accuse or yell, she just cried. And when he asked her why, she said, "You don't touch me anymore, and I miss you." Tom realized it wasn't about the weight or the scars. It was about how his shame was creating distance. We talked about this in our sessions, and eventually, he started small, leaving the lights on just a little longer, sitting beside her in bed again, telling her what he appreciated about her. That slowly reminded him that he was still someone who deserved closeness, not because his body was perfect, but because he was present, loving, and human. What often helps, and I've recommended this to many clients, is a very simple daily practice. Each morning, after brushing your teeth or shaving, say one kind thing to yourself out loud, not in your head. Say it like you mean it. Something like, "I like the way my eyes look when I smile," or "My hands have held so much in this life, and they're still strong." It might feel silly at first, but trust me, it's a quiet way to rebuild respect for the person you see in the mirror. Over time, that inner tone shifts, and with it, your confidence. I always say, our bodies tell the story of where we've been. Every scar, every wrinkle, every soft spot is part of the life we've lived. You are not broken. You are not used up. You are someone who has earned the right to be loved, just as you are, right now. Let yourself be seen. You are still here. That alone is beautiful. Another big one that tends to quietly creep in is the fear that you might not be able to perform the way you used to. And that fear alone can become the very thing that gets in your way. I've seen this so many times with both men and women in their 60s and 70s who still want closeness but start holding back because they worry about disappointing their partner or themselves. It's not always about physical ability. More often, it's anxiety, plain and simple. Your mind gets caught up in what-ifs and your body reacts. You tense up, you disconnect, and the moment passes before it even begins. That fear isn't weakness. It's a very natural response to the unknown. But if it's not addressed, it can quietly take the joy out of intimacy and replace it with pressure. One woman I worked with, Linda, 63, from Michigan, came in after telling me she just didn't feel like herself anymore. Since menopause, intimacy had started to feel uncomfortable, and every time she anticipated pain, her whole body braced. She began avoiding moments that used to bring her joy, not because she didn't want them, but because she was afraid of how it might go. What struck me was how much of this was happening in her mind before anything physical even started. Another patient, Ed, 68, a retired fireman, shared something similar. After being on blood pressure medication, he noticed changes, and suddenly he found himself overthinking every situation. He told me, "It's like I'm playing out the failure before I even try." Both Linda and Ed were stuck in a loop of fear, and that loop was killing their confidence. The turning point came when they each took a step back and realized it's not about being perfect, it's about being present. For Linda, we worked on creating a relaxed evening routine, Warm showers, soft lighting, and giving herself permission to take things slowly. For Ed, it started with humor. He began talking openly with his wife about the pressure he felt, and they found ways to laugh about it. That took the pressure off, and things started to shift naturally. One of the simplest ways to calm that fear is to create a pre-intimacy routine that helps your mind and body work together, not against each other. For many older adults, and asking for help is a sign of strength, not defeat. If this fear sounds familiar to you, know this: you're not broken, and you're definitely not alone. Think of your body like a trusted car. Sometimes it just needs a little more warming up, a little patience, and a lot less pressure. You've got nothing to prove, just something to share. And that sharing starts with kindness toward yourself. Here's something I see a lot, especially after major life changes: sadness tied to the past that ends up standing in the way of new closeness. For many people over 60, it's not about a lack of desire. It's about a quiet ache they carry from what's been lost. Maybe a spouse, maybe their younger years, maybe just the feeling that certain chapters are closed for good. And when that sadness lingers, it can feel like moving forward would be disrespectful to what came before. The heart wants connection, but the mind keeps whispering, it's too late, or it's not right. That's not failure. That's grief trying to protect you from more hurt. But if it stays too long, it can start to block the joy that's still waiting ahead. I remember working with Bill, a 70-year-old widower from St. Paul. He lost his wife Karen to cancer 5 years earlier, and after that, he just shut that part of his life down. He stayed active, took care of his garden, volunteered at the local library, but when it came to companionship, he avoided even the idea. Then he met Martha at a church fundraiser, and something shifted. They talked, they laughed, and for the first time in years, he felt a spark. But the next morning, he told me he felt like he'd done something wrong, like he was betraying Karen's memory. I've seen that same inner conflict with others too, like Dolores, 68, who'd been divorced for a decade and still felt like there was no place for intimacy in her life anymore. What both Bill and Dolores had in common wasn't just sadness, it was guilt over feeling hope again. And that guilt froze them in place. What helped Bill was reframing what intimacy really meant. It wasn't about replacing anyone or trying to recreate the past. It was about sharing this stage of life with someone who simply cared. He and Martha started slow, walks in the park, Sunday morning coffee, sitting side by side during choir practice. No pressure, just presence. Dolores, too, began by writing down her thoughts and sharing them with a friend, saying out loud what she missed, but also what she still wanted. That gave her permission to feel alive again. What often helps in cases like this is to start small and keep it simple. Don't aim for a big romantic leap. Aim for connection. Go for a short walk with someone, even if it's just a friend. Talk without comparing. Share memories without getting stuck in them. Being close to someone new isn't erasing the past. It's honoring your own capacity to grow, even now. Your heart is big enough to hold both memory and new beginnings. You don't have to rush anything, but you also don't have to stand still out of fear. Life doesn't end when you lose someone. It pauses, and one day, when you're ready, you get to press play again. Let me tell you, one of the most silent but powerful blocks to intimacy in later years is unspoken resentment. It doesn't show up all at once. It builds slowly over time, in offhand comments, unmet needs, forgotten apologies. And for many older couples, especially those who've been together for decades, those little emotional bruises start piling up until one or both partners begin to withdraw without even fully realizing why. The trust that once allowed for physical closeness starts to crack, not because the love is gone, but because the emotional space between you has gotten too heavy with things left unsaid. It's not always about a big betrayal. More often, it's the little things that were never healed. I worked with a woman named Susan, 66, from North Carolina, who came to me saying she felt invisible in her marriage. Her husband had started making casual remarks over the years about her weight, about how she used to look, about how he missed the younger version of her. He didn't mean them cruelly, but they stung. At first, she laughed them off or changed the subject, but inside, she began to retreat. She stopped changing in front of him, avoided his touch, and eventually they went months without any intimacy at all. When we finally talked about it, what struck me was how much pain she had been carrying alone, simply because she didn't want to seem too sensitive. I've seen similar stories in couples like Harold and Marie, married 42 years, who had built up layers of small disappointments, unshared chores, birthdays forgotten, emotional distance, and that resentment turned into silence. What helped, in both cases, was learning to name what they felt without blaming. For Susan, it meant telling her husband, calmly but clearly, "When you say those things, I feel less seen, less wanted." He was surprised and ashamed, but grateful she finally told him, and it opened the door to connection again. One of the simplest ways I've found to begin breaking through resentment is this. Every night, say one thing you appreciated about your partner that day. It doesn't have to be grand. Even "thanks for making coffee" or "I liked how you smiled at me" is enough. What this does is shift your attention from what's been missing to what's still there. And over time, those small moments rebuild the emotional bridge. The truth is, you're allowed to have been hurt, and you're allowed to heal. Even if the past feels heavy, the present is still yours to shape. Starting over doesn't mean erasing everything. It just means deciding that the next part of your story can be softer, kinder, and more open than the page before. Let me wrap up with one of the most misunderstood emotions I come across. That quiet, lingering guilt some folks feel just for still wanting closeness. I've had older patients tell me straight out, "I feel silly even thinking about intimacy at my age," or "Isn't that something I should have grown out of by now?" And I get it. When you grow up in a time where desire was rarely talked about, especially past a certain age, it's easy to absorb the message that wanting affection later in life is somehow wrong or embarrassing. But that guilt can settle in deep and turn something natural into something that feels forbidden. And when that happens, it's not just your body that pulls away, your heart does too. You might start to think that warmth, touch, even romance are things you're no longer allowed to enjoy, when in fact they're as human as breathing, and they don't have an expiration date. I worked with Robert, a 72-year-old retired engineer from Indiana who carried this exact kind of guilt. His upbringing was very strict. In his house, the message was clear. Old men don't talk about feelings, and they sure don't go chasing after romance. So even when he met Ellen, a widow he connected with at a book club, and even when she made it clear she liked being close with him, he couldn't bring himself to relax. He told me, "It felt like I was doing something shameful, like being 70 meant I should be past all that." The result? He pulled away from someone who genuinely cared and ended up feeling even more isolated. I've seen this pattern in women too, like Carol, 69, who hadn't been with anyone since her divorce 15 years earlier and thought intimacy just wasn't for her anymore. What changed for both Robert and Carol was giving themselves permission, not from me, not from their families, but from themselves. For Robert, it took sitting down in therapy and saying out loud, "I want connection, and I don't want to be ashamed of it." For Carol, it started with journaling, writing down all the old messages she'd been taught, and then writing a new one. "I'm allowed to want, even now." That shift in self-talk made all the difference. What I often recommend in these situations is to write down one phrase and repeat it out loud each morning. "I have the right to joy, tenderness, and love at any age." Say it while you're brushing your teeth or making coffee. It's not magic, but over time, it chips away at the old guilt and replaces it with something better: self-respect. You're not selfish, broken, or ridiculous for wanting warmth. You're human. And humans don't age out of needing connection. Even a small moment of permission given to yourself can open the door to something real and healing. You're not asking for too much. You're asking for what you've always deserved. If you saw yourself in any of these stories, know this: you're not alone. Share in the comments what resonated most with you. It might help someone else too. Subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell icon, and remember, you're stronger than you think, and life doesn't end. Not as long as you're still holding it by the hand.